All right. Welcome, everybody. I guess it's time to get started. This is our session on advanced document automation using conditional logic. So as we get going, how many of you were in Corey's Power Hour, Clio Draft Power Hour right before lunch? All right. Well, first, I'm going to tell you, might be disappointed, but I don't have a sequel to his Nightmare Before Trial, so you're out of luck there. If you missed that, stop down at Customer Success and ask him. He might give you a little private show on that. But I am Joe Kazarowski. I'm a manager of legal content here at Clio. I work with the Clio Draft team, but some of our other products on specifically automated templates, which is what we're going to talk about today. We only have 30 minutes, so we're going to move pretty fast. So we'll try to keep up with the Corey's pace there, which is my normal speed, so that's not a problem for me. We do have a new ebook coming out on conditional logic, so if you want to slow it down, go into more detail on anything, there's going to be a link on that page that'll let you request it. But for today's purposes, as we get going, the thing to keep in mind with conditional logic is just think about it as if then. If this, then that. That's what it boils down to. So, and that could be as simple as find and replace. It could be like the merge fields in Clio Manage. If you see this tag, replace it with this piece of data from your matter. We're going to take a quick sneak peek here at both Manage and Draft, the ones in the Clioverse, but there are a number of other products, so the concepts we talk about are applicable there as well. Our examples are just going to be mostly Draft and Manage. So you can kind of see here, Draft is a little more visual, got the nice pretty colors. But everything we're talking about can generally be done in Manage as well. So Manage is going to rely on Microsoft Word functionality, whereas Draft has its own native conditional logic functionality. So this is a representation agreement. Merge fields might look familiar for anyone who's done any document automation in Manage. But the additional part you can do here is you can use an if field in Word to trigger logic off of those merge fields in Manage. So here you can see, and we'll get into this in more detail, we're looking at a specific field and the state of the data in that field. This is the same template in Clio Draft. Again, you can see it's a little different. Color-coded here, the gray is going to be our conditional logic. So we're going to highlight the S and apply a condition to it so that S becomes conditional based on the state of our data. I think we got a little resolution issue here because of all the pretty colors, but you can kind of see that we have those conditions throughout, adding S's to nouns and verbs to adjust the grammar of our representation agreement, which we'll get into a little later. This is the guide I teased. So here's some of the stuff we could talk about if we had more time. But you can see there's a lot there. But again, if this, then that is what it's all going to boil down to. So what we're going to talk about today, there are three things that you should walk away with, three use cases for conditional logic. The first is pronouns. So pronouns, you can do that with a field, he, she, it, they, that type of thing. But we're going to look at using conditions along with a single field rather than having multiple fields for that, or what we call parallel insertions. The second thing we're going to look at is varying your templates for a single party versus multiple parties. And then the third one we're going to look at is conditions relating to varying the number of children in your templates. And then we'll wrap up with next steps with however much time I leave myself. So, all right, pronouns. So the easiest way to do that is a multiple choice field. And a multiple choice field is essentially a conditional logic operator, right? If you choose this option, it inserts this text, right? So in your pronoun example, pick, list, and manage, single, select, and draft. If you choose he, it inserts he. If you choose she, it inserts she. And we'll look at some other options there that take advantage of some additional features there. But at a high level, it's if this option, then this text. So one option, because you don't just have your subject pronouns, you also have your possessive pronouns, your object pronouns. You can have a separate multiple choice field for each type, right? So you can do a personal pronoun for he, she, it, they. You could do a possessive pronoun for his, her, its, their. Object pronoun for him, her, it, them. Which is fine. A lot of people do that because it's easy. It's just a radio button. It's stored in your context, so it's reusable. But there's an easier way to do that. Now, one of our best practices or recommended practices is to not ask for information you already know or can derive from another data point. So in the case of a pronoun, If we know the subject pronoun is she, we want to be able to insert her. Or if we know the subject pronoun is they, we want to be able to insert their or them. And we can do that using conditional logic rather than multiple fields. So how do we trigger conditional logic? There are two ways to do that, generally. One is direct conditional logic. That's where you just ask directly, what do you want to have happen? Okay. So that's like your multiple choice field, where you say, if you choose this option, insert this text. And in Clio Manage, pick list is basically what you see is what you get, or WYSIWYG for the techie people. But in draft, there's some additional options. You can vary it. So your option label is what you see, the preparer, but the text emerges what's actually what's get inserted into the document. So for pronouns, that may not be a big use case, but as we'll see later, that gives you some flexibility to kind of keep things real simple for your staff, but still insert the language you need. In draft, you can also use a custom value. So even if the list is only his, her, it's, their, you have the ability to add any other pronoun that your contact may choose to use. So some other examples of direct conditional logic where we say, if this happens, then do that. In a will, do you want to include a paragraph about military service? If yes, we're going to include 615. If you say no, we're going to just delete that paragraph. Guardian of the estate. Who do you want to be the guardian? Do you want it to be the attorney in fact? Do you want it to be another person, or do you not want a guardian of the estate? Based on that answer, it does something, right? You ask a question, it triggers a direct logic or direct action. The other way is to trigger it off of a field or another data point. And this is indirect conditional logic. And there are a number of different operators you can use there. The most common used is exists. This means that there's data or some value stored in a particular field. Does not exist is right along with that. But in the case, as we'll see with our pronouns, equals is the one you're going to look at. If you choose he, if it equals he, insert him. If it equals she, insert her, right? Same thing with does not equals kind of the parallel there. And we'll talk about contains a little bit more detail at the end, but that's where you look to see if the data stored contains at least this substring. And the animation basically just shows you how to do that in Clio Draft. So I should have started that earlier. But for our pronoun example, so here in this paragraph, we're using not only our subject pronoun, he, she, it, they, we're also using his, her, it's, their, but also our object pronoun, him, her, it, them. So this could be 3 separate fields as we talked about earlier, or it could be 4 conditions, right? If it equals he, if it equals she, if it equals it, if it equals they. And so we use those to insert the different versions there. If it equals he, we're going to insert his up above and him down below. So that's triggering off a different data point rather than asking again, what do you want for your possessive pronoun? What do you want for your object pronoun? We're only asking about the subject pronoun and then using conditions to do the other versions. Some other examples. Is there a successor trustee? If you've entered a name, we include 522. If you haven't entered a name, we're going to delete 522. And so this is a good kind of segue here that we're not going to go into a lot of detail because we don't have time, but it's really important to understand the formatting in your document. And Corey talked about this in the Power Hour. We also did a whole webinar on it last month. This QR code is a link to the on-demand version there. But you want to make sure you're using dynamic paragraph numbering. Because if you remove 522, you don't want it to go from 521 to 523. You want 523 to get renumbered. So it's important to understand how your documents are formatted and how to adjust that if you need to. All right. Another example, and this is one we're going to get into in a second, our second use case, number of represented clients. If client 2 full name exists, that means there's 2 clients. If client 2 full name does not exist, that means there's 1 client. So we're looking to the value of client 2 full name rather than asking how many clients do you have. In our third example, number of children. This also uses some advanced conditional logic with our conjunctions here. But we're looking to which names have been entered to determine how many children there are in this particular matter. If you've entered child 2 full name and not child 3, we know there's exactly 2 children. So we'll get into that more in a second here. I mentioned contains. We'll talk about this more, but in a power of attorney here, we want to select the options and then check a box based on whether that particular option has been selected. And we can talk about later why you do that rather than just inserting the text of the multi-select field. But contains is how you trigger that. All right. We talked about pronouns. Equals is our key operator there for field-based logic. The next one is 1 or 2 clients. And the big thing here is adjusting your grammar. So, attorney agrees to represent John and Sally Doe versus represent John Doe. John and Sally Doe agree. John Doe agrees. So it's an S, it's a single character, but it's a big deal, right? If you get that wrong, it doesn't look very professional. So Clio manage, you're using Microsoft Word, the if field. So here, for it to exist, we look to the state of client2 first name, right? Or client2 full name. And it's easier to compare to an empty string. So we say if client2 name is empty, then we insert nothing. But if it's not empty, so this is if this, then that again. But there's also an else in this case. If this, then that, else this other thing, okay? So if it's empty, we don't do anything. But if it's not empty, then we insert the word and the client2 first name. So that's and Sally, right? So if the second one is blank, it's just John Doe. If it's not blank, it's John and Sally Doe. And then it does not exist here. We just basically flip the then and the else, right? If it's blank, we want the S because we want to make it agrees for John Doe. And if it's not blank, we want to get rid of the S. So it's John and Sally Doe agree. So you can see it's a little hard to parse here if you're not familiar with kind of reading through the Boolean logic and programming. But the same thing in Clio draft. You can see here yellow is our data points and gray is our conditions. So the blue dot is going to be for exists. The purple dot is going to be for does not exist. So you can see here we're doing client first name, that's John. Then we're doing and Sally within the blue dot. Then we have Doe for the last name. And in the second one for agrees, we have agree with the purple dot around the S. So we only insert the S if there's no Sally. Okay. So that example didn't really, the format is probably not going to vary too much there. But the other thing to be aware of, and why I keep harping on or circling back to Microsoft Word formatting, is with things like a caption. So here it's important to understand tables. Because in this case, you can see there's already a word wrap there with case information, the case number. But where it really comes into play is if you have two plaintiffs, so an optional second plaintiff. You don't want that second plaintiff to push things to the right. You don't want everything to word wrap. You don't want those parentheses to get messed up. So you want to use, and this is a 1x3 table, where you have your plaintiff v. defendant, your separator, and then your case information. So tables keep things nice and tightly aligned vertically. All right, so that was our second use case, one or two clients. So now we're going to look at number of children. But before we get to that, we have to talk a little bit about some of those advanced operators I was mentioning earlier, the ands and the ors and things like that. So the first type of advanced conditional logic is nested conditions. And this is where you only do something if something else happens first. So for example, if a couple has no children, then we want to know, are they expecting their first child? But if they already have children, we don't need to ask that. So we only nest that second one inside the no children use case. Or in our little bowl picture here, in our power of attorney, we look at if there's a guardian. And if there is a guardian, then we want to look at, is there a successor guardian? And if there is a successor, then we want to look at, is there a co-successor? But we don't want to look at the co-successor if there's not a successor and if there's not a guardian. So it's kind of one side the other. So some use cases there, our child example. In this case, it's if child one exists on the outside, or they're expecting their first child, we want to include this paragraph. But within that, we have, is there a second child? So we make it minor children, or if not, minor child, right? So we're, again, adjusting the grammar within the paragraph, but outside is this condition is nested inside, do we have at least one child, or will we have at least one child? Some other examples, restoration of a former name. So we look at the data point, did you enter a former name? So that's the outside condition, does former name exist? And then within that, circling back to our first use case, we're using conditions to adjust possessive pronoun for the plaintiff. So conditions inside of conditions. And this one's a conservator of the estate. So in this case, we look at, did you enter a primary conservator? And then if you did, we're going to look at, is there an alternate? We don't look at, is there an alternate, unless there's a primary first. And if you can't tell, there's magenta on the outside and red on the inside, but the lines still kind of work even if the colors aren't distinct enough here. Another example, so this is a use case in Clio Manage. We're looking at a living will where there are three possibilities. You do not want to continue artificial nourishment. You want to continue it, but only for certain duration, or you want to continue it as long as it's the only procedure being provided, so open-ended. And so here, again, you're going to nest it, right? So you have your no condition by itself, but then within the you want to continue artificial nourishment, you have to look at, did you enter a days? So in the first case, we're flipping where that little X is. If you entered days, we're going to check the first option B. If you didn't enter a number of days, we're going to check option C. And again, you kind of have to parse it because it's an if inside of an if here. The same thing in Clio draft. Again, I apologize if the magenta and red isn't unique enough. You can see there's an outside bracket, and then you have two sequential conditions inside that nested within it. Okay. So the outside one is where you want to continue it, and then each of the nested ones is whether you've entered a number of days or you haven't entered a number of days. So conditions inside conditions. The other advanced condition is compound conditions. And this isn't where they're inside one another, it's where they're evaluated at the same time. It's either going to be and, or it's going to be or. And is where every element or every term has to be true for the whole thing to be true. And or is the opposite, where any term evaluated as true makes the whole thing true. And so you can see in the matrices here that there's only one use case or one combination where it evaluates as true for and all but one evaluate as true for or. So they're opposites, as we'll see in a second here. Number of children, this is our third use case, right? Circling back to that, now that we took our little detour, we're going to look at, does child 2 exist and child 3 does not exist, okay? And that's going to tell us there's exactly 2 children. If child 3 exists and child 4 does not exist, we know there's exactly 3 children. If child 1 exists and child 2 does not exist, we know there's one and only one child. The opposite of that, we're going to look at 0 or 2, right? If 1 exists and 2 does not exist, means there's exactly 1. The opposite means there's 0 or 2 or more. So here we use the or, and we're looking at, does child 2 exist? That's 2 or more. Or child 1 does not exist? That's no children. And the use case there is, it's a grammar thing, right? You say there are no children, there is one child, there are 2 children, right? Children, child, children. So you can use a compound condition here to insert the REN on the end of child there to make the sentence grammatically correct. Again, circling back to Microsoft Word, tables, important. Rather than having to manually adjust it, you can use conditions to create an expanding or collapsing table. So the conditions here, child 2 exists, child 3 exists, child 4 exists, child 5 exists, will make it vary from a 2-row table to a 6-row table. Row 1 being the header, right? So it'll automatically adjust based on the data in your matter. So you can have this kind of expanding, collapsing table using conditions in Clio draft. All right. So rapid fire here, circling back to some of the things I kind of skipped over. As bonus topics, multiple choice field, the other 2 use cases I didn't talk about in addition to pronouns. The POA, power to act, is going to be a single selector pick list. But this is a use case where your option label and your text to merge might be different, right? Because as a drafter, you know what independent and joint means. But in the document, you want to include language like who may act separately and who must act together. But you don't need to put that as your option label. In Clio Manage you do, which is fine, but you can shorthand it here. Or maybe you want to have a statutory citation for the option label and the actual text in the text to merge. So it gives you some flexibility there by having a different, or the option to have a different option label in text to merge. The other multiple choice type is a multi-select, and this is a field type in Clio Draft, but not in Clio Manage. And you can insert it vertically if you just want to use the data. And so, for example, this would be a use case like standard interrogatories where you only want to show the selected options, and you want to show it as a vertical list here, and it'll pick up your Microsoft Word formatting, including paragraph numbers. In a different use case, you may want to have it show horizontally as a list, comma separated or semicolon separated. But the other use case, which we'll take a look at in a second here, is using it as a hidden field or a control field. So in some cases, you only care about the selection, not the text to merge, right? Because you're going to insert different versions. So here, the grounds for divorce is kind of shorthand at the top of the document, but later on you may have a longer paragraph and you may want to include additional fields. So you want to be able to insert different text triggered off the same field. So what you can do is set your text to merge as just a number 1, like 1 to 9, or if there's more to 10, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, that type of thing. And then use that if contains operator. As we'll see, in that power of attorney example I teased earlier. So again, here, like in the form interrogatories or the interrogatories, you only want to show the selected options. Again, a best practice is if it's not checked, it's not relevant in your documents, so don't include it. But if it's a statutory form, like a power of attorney, you may have to list all the options, whether they're selected or not. So here you want to use your field as a hidden control field, and then use that if contains operator to check the appropriate boxes. If you've selected B, if it contains B, put the X there. If it contains C, put the X there. If it doesn't, then you're going to leave it blank. So that's where you care about the selection, but you don't really want to be inserting only selected text. All right. Okay. Next steps. That was a lot. That was fast. Again, this is a QR code we teased at the beginning, so if you didn't get it, here's another chance. This is our 50-plus page guide to conditional logic that's coming soon. It has some additional resources on this webpage as well, but there's a request form there. So go ahead and click on that. If you miss it, I'll give you some other options to get information on that in a second. You can also get example templates from the Template Exchange. You might have heard Donnelly talk about this yesterday if you're down in the Spotlight lounge down there. But these are going to be example templates you can use out of the box. You can use them as a starting point. You can modify them for your firm, or you can copy conditional logic from them and paste it into any of your own templates. And so we have templates in all 50 states. There's over 750 example templates available in the Exchange for Clio Draft users. All right, and one of those is the conditions library. And this is a document you're not going to use as is. What you're going to do is you're going to go in there and you're going to copy the blocks that you want to reuse, like that number of children thing. I would not rebuild that if you don't have to. So lean into related contacts or contact selects and manage so that you can use the logic that we've built out here. So you want your children to be contacts or role cards in Clio Draft, and contact selects are a good way to do that if you want them at the matter level in Clio Manage. But as long as they're contacts, you can reuse this. Otherwise, you'd have to build the logic yourself if you just use regular single line text custom matter fields. But condition library is a good one to let you get some of that without having to do the work yourself. Don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. All right. Corey talked about this. Jack talked about this. A lot of people talked about this. Questionnaires coming soon to Clio Draft. Relevant here because it includes conditional logic as well. It's a little different though, because the logic we've been talking about so far is going to adjust how the generated document is created. Here, the conditional logic is going to change the user experience. It's going to change the data entry process. So in the past, I was talking about the indirect logic where we're looking at, did you enter child 2 full name, right? That's going to affect the finished document. But here, we don't want to ask about child 2 if there's only one child. We want to simplify the data entry process, especially if you're sending this out to your client. Questionnaires can also be an internal tool. So if you want to streamline it for your staff and kind of put guardrails on it so that they don't go off kind of rogue on things and fill out fields you don't want them to fill out, you can use conditional logic to really lock in the path, right, and drive the data entry process. So this affects how you're entering the data. The logic we talked about for the first 23 and a half minutes relates to how the data affects the generated document or the finished product. All right. That's a lot. It was fast. Have questions, you can visit us down in the Success Center. If you want a one-on-one time there. If you want some help adding conditional logic to your template or just automating your templates or cleaning up your custom matter fields, you can talk to folks like Crystal down there. And Jen's going to be down there as well. So we have our professional services group that can help with that. If you want to take a look at questionnaires, Clio Draft generally, have any questions about Draft or any other Clio products, you can visit us in the Level Up with Clio area. And with that, I am done. So thank you for your time. If you have questions, we can take a few of those now. Otherwise, I'll hang around as well.
Hi, I was wondering if you could explain the multiple choice where you had like the 1 through 9 with different text to merge in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yep. So the question relates to like a multi-select field or another one where we're using our field as a hidden control field. So generally your fields, you're going to insert data. The fields are intended to insert data. It's going to merge data from your matter into your finished template. But you can also use them just to control your conditional logic, to adjust the finished product without inserting any data. And so in that case, like with the power of attorney example, you need to include A to O every time. But you're not necessarily going to check that. You might always only check O, all the above, or maybe you want just A for a specific real estate property, type of thing. And so you want to always show A to O, but you only want that X to show up. And so you could do that with, direct conditional logic. Do you want to check A, yes or no? Do you want to check B, yes or no? Or if you're in Clio Manage, you could use checkboxes for that. But the other option is to use a multi-select that lists A to O as separate line items, and then use conditions. If contains A, if contains B, if contains C, or 1, 2, 3, or 0, 1, 0, 2, depending on what you want to use as a placeholder. And if it contains that, then it's going to check that box. And so with other things that don't have the nice numbering, like our power of attorney, I usually use, depending on the number of options, like form interrogatories. If you have 130, I would use 001. So it's unique because contains, right? 10 contains 1, so that's not going to work. Or 100 contains 10. So you want to make sure that your text emerge is unique. So we're looking for that unique string with our control fields. All right. That answer your question? Or you have a follow-up? If not, any other questions?
All right, thank you. Is there any way of having like a derived field that could exist within the card section, so you don't have to continually insert each condition every time you need to do a he or she and so forth throughout the document?
Yeah, so a couple ways to do that. One is just to store it at the contact level with separate fields, since it's a multiple choice field. It's pretty easy to check a radio button, so that reuses your data. Otherwise, copy paste. Anything you create once, you can just paste it in. We're looking at ways, the questionnaire, looking at some new features. That's the reason we're in beta right now, just figure out what people want, how they want to use it. But looking at how you can calculate that, right? So instead of having a date of birth and an age, can you calculate age from the date of birth? Or maybe there's a way to automatically insert those other pronoun versions within your field as part of the construct of the field. But right now, you'd either want to use multiple choice fields, or you'd want to use conditions. And if you use conditions, you just want to copy and paste it. Don't, manually apply it each time.
Thank you.
I'm looking to the light, so I kind of see motion, but that's about it. So.
Tagging on to the last question, if you do copy and paste the conditional formatting, does it affect the format of the overall document, or do you have to do a little bit of editing there as well? Yeah,
so that's going to depend on a number of things. And Word actually will let you choose. Do you want to keep the source format? Do you want to keep the destination format? Do you want to merge it? It can also be affected by the style of your normal.dot. So yeah, it really depends is the answer, which is probably not the answer you want. But yeah, usually it's pretty easy. You can highlight it and then change it to match if it doesn't match. But best practice would be to get your normal.dot in the format that you mostly use. So whether it's Time New Roman 12, double spaced, then when you paste it in, usually it's going to do that. If you're coming from a different template, you might have to do the little options that pop up with Word to see which format you want to use.
So it looks like for like the children, you're going to have fields or contact relationships set up of child 1, child 2, child 3. But if you don't know how many children somebody's going to have, is there some way to kind of get it to cycle through depending on the number without having to have an advanced knowledge of number of children kind of thing?
It's a good question. What we call that is enumeration. That's not something that's currently offered by Manager Draft. What we do, again, our best practice is design your templates for the majority of your matters, 80-20, right? 80% of the time, you're going to have 5 or fewer children. So build it up to 5, and if you need to go above that for that edge case, then you can add one more manually or something like that. But yeah, that is a feature some tools offer, hot docs, things like that. But again, if it's somewhere you have a lot of 7 children, or if you're looking at beneficiaries or heirs, you might need to go up to 10 or 15 or 20 to cover your 80%. But yeah, right now, the way it's set up, you do need to have kind of a hard cap with the automation and use conditional logic.
Thank you.
Like right over here.
Does the contains search function only search the title of the field or also the content of the text?
Right. So in draft, all of our conditioner operators look at the text emerge, what's actually inserted into the document. So it's not going to look at your option label, which is important if you have option labels that don't match text emerge. If it's a custom field coming from Clio Manage, they're going to be the same. It's not going to matter. But it only looks in the text emerge. It's case sensitive, so it's looking for exact character by character matches.
Thank you.
Right. I know we're a little over time, so maybe one more question if someone's got that. Otherwise, like I said, I'll stick around in the hall, and then we'll all be up, down, and level up our customer success. All right. Like I said, I'll stick around for a little bit, but I appreciate everyone's time and enjoy the rest of the conference.